What's going on, everybody? Welcome into Bills Chat Live. I am Josh. With me, as always, is Luka. Luka, how are you doing on this Friday evening?
I'm happy it's Friday. It was a busy work week, I'll be honest. There was a lot going on, things like that. But in that work week, it was kind of like my mind was only half there because, Josh, I don't have much to talk about right now because I was doing a lot when it comes to everything we're going to be doing tonight and what this show is about. And it was one that we didn't even originally have scheduled in our off-season schedule, just to let the audience know and everyone understand. We weren't planning necessarily, say, a month ago to do this live show. And yet here we are because there was just one topic, you and I don't want to bury you too much here. And I know you'll introduce everyone into this, but there was one topic that we felt this live stream, this live show that we have been doing was perfect for. And I'll let you take it away from there because I am excited for this episode.
I am excited too, and I will tell you, we were battling some internet issues before we went live. So, Luka, just throw me a hand signal or something if it looks like my internet's going out. But hopefully, we're good to go. Real quick, before we get into the topic of tonight, which is wide receivers, I do want to talk about what Luka and I have going on the night of the draft. We mentioned it last week. We are going to be live for the entire first round of the NFL draft. We are super excited about that. We're going to continue to mention that because we'd love you to join us for that. It's going to be obviously a Bills focus, but we're going to be giving our thoughts on the picks that happened before the Bills pick at 27, how that could impact the Bills. And we're really just going to be hanging out. We have some special guests lined up, casually just watching the draft, watch along style, and a lot of fun. But Luka, it's April now, April 7th. And everything we do on Built in Buffalo and content wise, well, except for your Saber stuff, is now draft oriented. This is our favorite time of the content creation year. And tonight might be my favorite episode that we are going to do because we are going to hyper focus on the wide receivers in this class. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, the Bills, I think we can all agree, have a need at wide receiver. The desperation of that need does vary from person to person. There are people out there that think Gabe Davis is just fine as a number two, and the Bills just need to add some more juice to that room. There are people that are worried about Stephon Diggs' age. There's people that don't believe in Gabe Davis. So depending on where you fall on those certain things, you could think the Bills need to add an immediate impact starter, or maybe they just need to add a sound prospect to the pipeline because whether you like Gabe Davis or not, he is an unrestricted free agent after 2023. Luka, before we get into this draft class tonight, where do you fall on the Bills' current need at wide receiver?
The need at wide receiver is not, let's say, dire, because to me, dire means you have an obvious hole outside with no dominant receiver. You have absolutely nothing out wide. I'm trying to even think of a team as an example. I guess the Texans would be an example to me. Like, you don't have that clear cut number one in the league outside for you, and you absolutely have to fill that. That is dire. Um, Outside of Diggs, because that is what kind of fills that get us out of dire level. I think that's where the Bills are. Gabe Davis is absolutely still capable of being a number two in this league, but the question mark is there now after a underwhelming 2022 season in some's mind. My mind is there a little bit. I'm not super critical. There's just a lot that left you wanting more with him. So because of that, it's not dire. It's not something that you are slam dunking. First round is going to be a wide receiver. It's all about if you're trading up, staying where you are, so on and so forth. But in all, you should be looking for someone that could come in and make an impact day one, hopefully, in some facet of this offense. You know, whether it's round one or round two, let's say. And maybe even round three if you really fall in love with a guy. If Bean has fallen in love with someone day two, you know, in the third round, I would still accept that. It's like that is a place you need to add someone here that could potentially bring something different and just more dynamic to this offense out wide, because that is really what they need.
Had to move a PlayStation controller out of the way of my mouse. It was driving me crazy. I am with you on the need. And I also, I did want to address this very quickly. There's a question in chat about is Diggs in or out? Look, we're not going to talk about Stephon Diggs tonight. I will just tell you, if any of you caught a Giants reporter last night speculating that Stephon Diggs wants out, look, I'm going to look into the camera. Pay no attention to that. His basis of that was Stephon Diggs congratulating Isaiah Hodgins 7 weeks ago when he signed his deal in New York with two emojis, So there is no financial path to the Bills getting out of the Stephon Diggs contract. It's just not going to happen. In fact, they made it even harder to do so earlier this offseason when they restructured his deal to free up some more space. So that's not going to happen. Whether Diggs is happy or not, who really knows? The last image we have of Diggs is him and Allen screaming at each other on the sideline. My guess is they're probably fine. It may not be like BFF cover of Sports Illustrated for kids at this point, but it's also April. Like games don't start for 4 months, 5 months. As Lucas says, they're competitors, they're alphas, and they will work through this because they know that for each of them to be their best, they need the other one. So not going to spend too much time on that. Roy Collins is in chat. Happy Easter to you too. Always appreciate you hanging out. All right, Luca, this wide receiver class. I've been trying to think how to describe this wide receiver class. I kind of want to use the Baskin Robbins analogy of, the 31 flavors, and it just depends what flavor you like, whether you like chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, that could be who you like. There really is no CeeDee Lamb in this class. There's no Jamar Chase in this class where you just look at that prospect and you're like, that's the guy. That's the guy that really has no weaknesses. And as long as he stays clean off the field, he's going to be a dynamite star in the league on the field. That's not this class. This class really has guys that are good at 2 or 3 things, but there are things that make you uncomfortable. And that even goes to the tippy top, where I think the majority of people think that the number 1 wide receiver in this class is Jackson Smith and Jigba. And I will just tell you, Luka does not agree with that. We'll get into that tonight. But when I look at this wide receiver class, it's so funny to see the reaction of folks like on Twitter when you just shoot out something about, hey, what do you think of this player? And they're like, oh, he's too small. Or what do you think of this player? Oh, he doesn't run routes well enough. It reminds me, Luca, of when you are on a road trip and you're trying to book a hotel room and it's like 10 o'clock at night and you're like, okay, I want a 5-star hotel. I want a suite. I want a king size bed. I want a hot tub. Okay, great. And then you start getting on your little TripAdvisor app and you're like, no, wait a minute. There's none of that. There's a 3-star hotel and maybe they have a queen size bed and they got some sub good reviews, but this is what we have to work with. We all agree the Bills could use an Alpha X that's just ready to come in and make a Justin Jefferson-like impact his rookie year. But the reality of this situation, Luca, is they are going to really have to hunt through this wide receiver class if they're going to find somebody that ends up being on that level.
Yeah, there's no slam dunk of a prospect in the wide receiver pool this season. I can even agree with that, even though I am pretty deep in love with one prospect. As you said, JSN is not the guy that I have at the top of my one and only rankings. And I just want to preface that as we get into this. It is my rankings. I understand this is not the universal rankings or how others may see it. This is just how I see it. But regardless, there's no slam dunk. There's no alpha, as you said, and I love to say, there's no guy who's going to come in and be essentially that 1B to Stephon Diggs's 1A at this moment in time. There may be someone that is kind of unexpectedly better than what we, hope them to be, but you're evaluating them now based on projection. You're evaluating them on the tape they've provided you, in the past in their college career. And with all of that in mind, you've said it correct. There is just not one dude in there that is a Jamar Chase, a CeeDee Lamb is another great example. One of these guys who realistically,
Waddle.
if you didn't have Diggs or Tyreek Hill or whatever, they would be your number 1 and you'd probably be okay with that. Like there's not that guy, but that's also, in my opinion, okay for the Bills, where it gives them the ability to make sure they do a lot of work and do their due diligence on the depth of this wide receiver class and make sure they have that handful of guys or more, depending on how many they ultimately fall in love with, that they really like, and then just understand where they fall on the draft board. So if they don't get the one that they liked with their first round grade, they are probably 85 to 90% as much in love with this guy that they have as a second round grade. And they could maybe make an aggressive move to get him in the second round, and or another guy they're at 75% in love with, so on and so forth in the third round. So I think there's a lot of guys here in this year's draft. And when we're going to go through these prospects, Josh, I'll be honest, like we've talked off, camera and whatnot, there's the guy I'm in love with. And then there's 2 options that are honestly like your second round option and third round option, where I'm like, at least you're getting 85% of him. At least you're getting 75% of those 2, things like that, where it's like, I can understand that if you do like a certain guy and you want to bring a certain thing to your offense, if you're the Bills, there are things out there for you in this wide receiver class. Just don't expect it to be a slam dunk day one, but they can absolutely make an impact in a great one, if that, come the start of the season.
So the reason why we're having this show is Luka told me who his number one wide receiver was, and my response was, "Really?" And that's where the disagreement came from. And I will just tell you all what my process is. When I don't, this is not my full-time job. Okay. I have 2 kids, I have a wife, I have a full-time job. So I don't have the ability to watch film 8 hours a day. So what I do is I read the scouting reports from sites that I trust and sites that I like and sites that I respect. I listen to podcasts almost during all of my free time. I go in with a foundation of what I expect this player to look like. Then I go and then I start watching highlights of these players just to get a feel for how they move, how they look. That prior to the highlights, just reading is where Luca and I had our first conversation. And he was like, "This guy is my number one." And I was like, "Really?" And I will tell you, I have since gone back and watched the highlights. And then of the guys that are in the first round conversation, I have actually gone back and then watched actual game tape, all 22 breakdowns, things like that. So my opinion has changed. I would even say substantially over the last week. So Luca, let's start with the guy who is your number one receiver in this class. Let's start with Zay Flowers. What is it that makes you so attracted to Zay Flowers that makes him your number one receiver?
To me, Zay Flowers, and I thought you were going to pull one real quick and just be like, you're number one guy, Quentin Johnston. And I was going to be like, come on, man,
Just
don't do me dirty.
throw
Like
you
that.
under the bus.
Yeah. No, Zay Flowers to me is the guy who has I'm a ceiling guy. And to me, Zay Flowers is a guy who has a lot of great tools to his bag that are borderline elite. And then on top of it, his ceiling and the dynamic level of his ceiling to me is the highest among all of these prospects. There is things that need to kind of be improved on, and just kind of you're going based more on potential than what you've actually seen tangibly. But it's just like Zay Flowers pops. Obviously, highlights are highlights, but when you watch an entire 60 minutes of a game, for instance, and you watch the actual workload he puts in, week out, the things he would do for Boston College and kind of look, it's a Power Five school, kind of, but they're really at the bottom tier of the Power Five. And he could make a lot out of nothing just due to all of the raw talent and ability that he has. And his footwork is incredible. His catch radius, even though he is smaller framed at 5'9" with not, freakishly long arms, he still attacks the ball a lot. He has an incredible success rate on multitude of routes in his tree, which he has a very diverse route tree, honestly, especially for a guy that's small, where maybe an offense or a coordinator would want to kind of just exploit him through a certain couple things in that offense that you're going to get him in space and whatever it is. They used him in a lot of different facets, and he would succeed with all of those things he was asked upon. There's just so much to love about him. When I watched him all the time, just to throw a comp out there because people love it. I'm not the biggest of comp people, but I know that's what a lot of people do like. To me, what I see is if he's able to be a legitimate pro, and if he's able to be that guy that I think he can be, really the baseline to him, to me, is kind of a Tyler Lockett like impact. And then you could even bring up, if you really want to see him get to his true ceiling, in my mind, the guy we mentioned earlier, Jalen Waddle like impact for an offense. He can be that guy to me. I mean, that is years down the road. I think you need to refine a few things, stuff like that. But all of these guys need things they need to work on. That's why Tyler Lockett to me is someone that doesn't get enough credit to me, but is great at a lot of different things and is a legitimate outside wide receiver, even with the limitations, or quote unquote limitations, that he has due to his size. Like, there's just so much to love about how dynamic, fast, quick, and great reliable hands he has when it comes to Zay Flowers. I'm in love with this guy. To me, he is my favorite wide receiver in this class, bar none.
Zay Flowers has grown on me during this process. And at the beginning, I was kind of like, I don't see it. I don't love the way he reads. But having gone back and watched him, first of all, best highlight package in the draft. He gets the ball in his hands, and it looks like he thinks he is going to score every time he touches the ball. And that is not nothing. There are times when he gets the ball in the open field, and this is going to be a strong comp. So I don't want you to think that I'm telling you he's this guy, but it reminds you of Antonio Brown, where every time he catches the ball, you think this guy has a chance to score. And he is 23, so he's a little older. I will also tell you, Luka, and I even messaged you last night. I was so infuriated watching their quarterback play at Boston College with Zay Flowers. There'd be so many times he'd be wide open and the quarterback would either just overthrow a check down in the flat or not even look his way. And he did have a higher drop rate. I have it here in front of me, 9.1%, which is a little concerning. But I thought there was a good note on him from Reception Perception that said normally drop rate isn't something you overly get too concerned about. And in a situation like Zay Flowers, they could have even been frustration drops like, oh, the ball's finally coming my way. And then you get a little bit too aggressive. He's a very aggressive player. And he's not, in my opinion, the best route runner in this class as far as polish goes. I think there's still work to go. But when you see his short area quickness and there's no limitations with his athletic ability that makes you think he's not going to develop into a very high end route runner. So when we started this, just full transparency, my number one wide receiver was Jordan Addison. And then having gone back and looked at a few things, that has changed this week. I actually, at this point, Luka, would take Zay Flowers over Jordan Addison. We can talk about him here in a second. My only concern about Zay Flowers is, as special as I think he can be, I do think that this particular draft class is just littered with guys that are about 5'10", 180-pound jitterbugs that run good routes, have different levels of run after the catch. Zay Flowers might be the best in the entire class at that, but if you're going to get to a point where you spend a first round pick on Zay Flowers, could you go elsewhere in the first round, take a Darnell Wright, take a tackle that falls to you, and then take Josh Downs in the second round or a Mims in the second round? See, that's where the Zay Flowers conversation gets complicated to me. And I will say I would like it if the Bills got him at 27, but there will be a part of me on day 2 that's watching the wide receivers fall, depending on what else was there at 27. And if Josh Downs falls to this into the second round, thinking, man, we could have done that a little differently. But that's a dangerous way to draft. If you love him, you love him. I also love his immediate fit. You have Diggs and Davis on the outside. I think he immediately slides in as your instant slot, and that's a great room for him to grow. And I think he does have the upside, Luka, to either take over for Diggs in a couple years when Diggs moves on, or take over for Davis after next year when Davis moves on. So from that standpoint, I really love the player. I can't get with you that he's my favorite in the draft class, but I hope you're at least somewhat impressed that I have come around on him and put him ahead of Addison.
A little bit. I'm a little bit impressed. I'm glad you're finally starting to warm up to Zay Flowers. I will say there is something to what you said when it comes to why take a Zay if you love Josh Downs or a Mims, and I'm kind of with you on that. But this to me is just in a bubble. You're ranking all these wide receivers. Who do you like the most? Things like that. I'm not necessarily considering, value based on where they will project to fall in the draft per se, because I will tell you, if you can guarantee me you pass up on Zay Flowers and then like if this organization loves Josh Downs and they're going to do whatever they can to make sure they pick Josh Downs and say the first 10 picks of the second round, I am not going to even be remotely upset with that. And we're going to get into him as well. But it's like, you can't guarantee those kinds of things. You can never guarantee those things. And like you said, if you fall in love with a guy like Zay Flowers, like if I was sitting in that war room, I'm in love with Zay Flowers. I'm not even going to be remotely concerned if some random drop at wide receivers on day 2 occurs. I love this guy for a reason. I wanted to make sure I got him in this building to do whatever it is that I want him to do, which is basically, in my mind, Josh, it is to really threaten that outside role while also still being someone that you could really have a lot of fun with in the slot as well and move around and just try to create things for. You're already doing that, you try, or you're thinking about doing that with a Deontay Hardy. And now all of a sudden you bring in a Zay Flowers who even has higher end and is, another kind of guy that brings elite quickness to this offense. There's a lot of fun things to have with that. So I understand where you're coming from. If he's not your number one, with this draft class, I can fully understand that. If you're a JSN as your number one guy, I fully understand it. If you're a Jordan Addison, a Quentin Johnston, for some reason, this draft class is a little bit unique in the sense of there's not even one or two clear-cut guys to me when it comes to what I understand other people may like. It's kind of what you like the most in a guy, and then what you think can be worked around when it comes to the one or two things they need to be worked on, or the question marks, or whatever it may be. So I fully understand that, but I'm happy you're starting to come around on Zay.
I'm coming around on him, but this is where I'm going to make you angry. I'm going to tell you a player that I would take over Zay Flowers that I don't think is in most projections rated higher than Zay Flowers, and that's the Tennessee wide receiver Jalen Hyatt. And I will tell you, just lining them up prospect for prospect, I don't even know that I necessarily rank Hyatt over Flowers. I think that they're comparable in a sense that they do so much different things. But as far as like apples to apples, I think they're about the same level of prospect. But where I get a little turned off with Zay, where I'm like, I can get a Downs, I can get a Mims in the second round. The things I like about Hyatt just aren't available to the Bills in the second, third, or fourth round. So I will tell you, Hyatt was a guy I did not expect to love as much as I do when I was just in the read the scouting report portion of my draft research, because in a lot of ways, he is a one-trick pony. He reads like a one-trick pony. He ran a lot of deep balls in Tennessee. He was schemed wide open in that Big 12 offense they run, Big 12 style offense they run in Tennessee. And he had the most wide open catches, and that was by design. He has a very limited route tree. And he's for a guy as fast as he is, and he is blazing fast. I think his 40 time was like exactly at 4.4, but I'm telling you, he plays like sub 4.3 on tape. That's what he looks like. He is the fastest guy out there by far. There is no issue with speed. And when you watch him play, he does leave a little bit to be desired when it comes what happens with the ball in his hands. I've seen some comparisons to Ted Ginn, and I almost want to be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Ted Ginn was one of the best return men of a generation. In the open field, Ted Ginn was dangerous. Jalen Hyatt very much is, if you give him a seam, he's going to take it and he can run to the end zone, but he's not going to put a lot of jukes on you in the open field. So why do I love him? One, he has the elite game breaking speed. Two, not only can he go deep, his deep ball tracking is elite. You watch him go under those balls that were thrown to him. And what I love about him, Luka, he is a natural catcher and he has late hands. And I was so excited to message you this the other day. I was like, have you seen the late hands? And look, I'm going to say a name here that I am not comping Jalen Hyatt to. I'm going to say Randy Moss. Ooh. Think back to some of the highlights you see of Randy Moss, where he is running past the defender. The ball is coming. It's coming into your screen. His hands aren't even up yet. And then at the very last second, puts his hands up to catch the ball. Now, look, I'm not comping him to Randy Moss. I'm just talking about the hands. You're a defensive back chasing a wide receiver that you are not as fast as. So one way you can cheat is to keep your eyes on the defender running forward instead of turning around and looking at the ball and play their hands. Jalen Hyatt's late hands take away that ability of the defender to do that. I think he comes into the league, Luka, instantly as Will Fuller. And year one, he's Will Fuller. When did Will Fuller have his best success? In Houston, when they had a DeAndre Hopkins on the other side. That would be our Stephon Diggs. We also have Gabe Davis and Dawson Knox. Will Fuller had one role. You're going to either get double teamed because you're too fast to single cover, and that's going to open things up for Hopkins. Or if they're dumb enough to single cover, you're going to run by whoever's trying to run with you. This is a guy that's going to command a double team at the NFL level. 2023, without even ironing out his route tree, he is going to add a dynamic explosion to this offense that has just not been there in recent years. Where I get excited about the future is he was not asked to run routes, so I am going to stop short of saying he can't run routes. He ran posts decently. He ran slants decently. There was a comeback he ran where his feet were super choppy, and you were like, whoa, buddy, you took about 7 unnecessary steps there. That was a little off-putting, but I feel like with the skill set he has, the speed he has, the natural hands he has, ironing out the route tree is something that I think can be done. And we're going to talk later in this show, Luke, about a player that I still really like in Jordan Addison. But some of the things that when you watch him and you're sitting there wishing like, oh, I just wish he was a little bigger. I wish he was a little faster. I wish he was a little more physical. Like those things aren't going to come. Like that's who he is. The stuff you wish Jalen Hyatt could do is still obtainable because he has the natural speed. He has enough size. He's 6 foot, almost 180 pounds. His hands are just fine. The route tree is a concern, but that can be taught. Some of the physical limitations of a Jordan Addison, that's just something you have to live with. Where are you at with Jalen Hyatt? And what am I just fanboying too much here, or have I at least somewhat convinced you that he belongs in the first round?
I don't think you can convince me he belongs in the first round. But what I will say is it's completely understandable that certain individuals, and I think teams are included in this. I think there are GMs even that will see the things that you are seeing and drool over them and just crave them and are willing to spend, say, the 25th overall pick. Not going to say the team, 27th if it's the Bills, things like that, that they are like, this is a dynamic weapon of what we need it to be. And I think your comp of Will Fuller early in his career, just being asked to essentially run go routes, deep posts, skinny post corners, things like that to demand over top double coverage, whatever it may be, that opens up a lot more of the field for all of their other pieces, including their main guy, DeAndre Hopkins. I think all of that makes absolute sense. And I agree with it. I love the comment about the hands. I think that's an underrated thing that I don't even pay attention to a lot. And I really wish I did, because it's a massive tool to a wide receiver to show hands as late as possible, because it's just a disadvantage for the DB who wants to make a play on it, but they can't actually look at the ball or turn to watch what is going on. They have to pay attention to you. I think those are all very, very valid points. I think where I kind of fall short with Jalen Hyatt, though, is you mentioned 180 pounds for 6 foot. He's very slight with that weight. And for instance, I'm trying to find it here. His press coverage win rate and success rate was extremely low. He is very
Yeah.
easy to get off of his route and get off of, rhythm and everything like that. And I think that's just a natural thing with his size, his slight frame, and everything like that. And if he doesn't have something else, at least at the line, that he can do to make you back off, what is stopping an NFL defensive coordinator from just having their best press corner there, if they have someone that's legitimate, just jamming them up every play? And then all of a sudden, you basically bought your defense probably 2 seconds in that instance just there. And you just need to make sure all the other guys are doing their job covering the rest of the field. There's things like that that can be countered, where it's like, if that's why you're drafting this guy, like, that to me makes sense. But also there's concerns there in the instant return, which you don't draft for instant returns, but it's kind of a crapshoot if you're actually going to get that at the NFL level, because that's all you kind of have the promise of. And now you're just banking on his future will progress and he will develop all these other skills you talked about, which he absolutely could. It's just you haven't seen it yet. So you need to be able to trust your coaching staff, everyone in that room that needs to develop this talent and refine them a lot more than other guys you would probably take in that first round. Now, all of that said, Josh, Jalen Hyatt to me is that, how there are certain guys that you mention this all the time. You love to say this. It's like the first round of the draft ends, all the GMs kind of immediately go into day 2 mode and they're looking at who's left on the board. If Jalen Hyatt's name is still on that board, there's probably going to be 10 GMs at least who are going, okay, what do we need to do to move up if we need to make sure we secure this kind of guy? Because I think Jalen Hyatt to me, so for instance, I have a tier system, right? Zay Flowers was the top of my tier 1. There's another individual in my tier 1. Then it goes to tier 2. There's 3 guys there. Jalen Hyatt to me was my tier 3 top guy. You could realistically, to me, call him hit 2.5, 2.3. I just couldn't justify enough because there's a lot of things like his, he never actually dominated against zone coverage as well. For
Yeah.
instance, like if you were able to do that, he was in the fourth percentile in the entire D1 college metric system against zone coverage and success rate. Like, that is a question mark. That's a flag to me. I don't know what we're doing here and why this guy's not beating zone. And I imagine that's mainly because he's being asked to run a lot of 9 routes, go routes, things like that, where as long as you have the zone in the right spot and they understand their job, he's not going to succeed. Right. That's the whole premise of this. I
So my
love,
counter to that real quick would be, I think that really falls under the bucket of, I don't think they drew up a lot of zone beaters for him. You mentioned the press thing, and that's absolutely fair. His press percentage of beating press was abysmal, but he was only pressed 4% of the time in college. So that's where my belief that he wasn't necessarily asked to beat press. So if you're only pressed 4% of the time and your success rate, I have that right here, un momento, his success rate on beating press was actually 53.8% of the time. How much of a sample size is that truly? And he was against zone, he was against zone 44.6% of the time. But when he's running, 16.6% of his routes were 9 routes. Another one was 8.1%. I mean, he ran less than 2% comebacks. This is all for reception perception, by the way. He ran 4.1% outs. His route tree is comical. It's so hard to project him to the NFL. That's where I want to defend him. And I will say one more thing before I kick it back to you, because I know I interrupted you, but I don't want to spend like the whole show on Jalen Hyatt, although trust me, I would love to. For Josh Allen, 3rd and 3. The Bills, it seems like, have been trying to add rack to their offense. Like, let's go out and draft James Cook. Let's go trade for Nyheim Hines. Let's find receivers that Josh Allen can dump the ball to and get rack, because we need to improve rack in this offense. I think chasing rack is a mistake, because when it's crunch time, when there needs to be a play made, Josh Allen is looking deep forward. He's seeing, is there an explosive play available? So instead of continuing to try to find that, we're going to dump it down to Quentin Johnston, who is good after the catch, let's go draft the best deep ball receiver in this entire class. Let's take the top off of this defense and really stress a defense that way, where they have to keep 2 guys on Jalen Hyatt, because guess what? He can go 70 yards downfield and Josh Allen can still get the ball to him. You can really stress defenses that way. And I just love the idea of what it can mean. Even if he doesn't develop into a wide receiver 1 in this league, and let's say all he ends up ever being is Will Fuller, for the rest of Stephon Diggs' career, that's still going to be a really fun piece for this offense. You'll always have to have that wide receiver 1 next to him if that's the case. But for the 27th pick in the draft, I really like that. So anyway, I know you're in the middle of talking about like some of his success against zone, and it's all valid. He has to prove that. But I also think that he hasn't had enough sample size to prove that he can't do that.
Yeah. It's just to wrap it up, because I don't want to spend this entire time kind of bashing Jalen Hyatt, because I like the upside and I like the projection. But to me, that's what he is. He's a whole lot of projection. There's 1 year of tape, really 1 year of good tape, I should say, on him. Things like a simple little red flag to me, for instance, you said he runs 16.6 9 routes, go routes, for people that don't know what a 9 route is. Then there's 11.8% say slants. He's only succeeded on those, which, by the way, is essentially catch drop, or catch, not catch. I don't want to say drop per se. So his success rate on that is 59.4%. Like anyone else in this draft class right now that you were talking in the first round, if, without going through one by one, looking at them, I'm almost positive they're at least in the 70s. Every single one of them. He is 59. His dig routes, which is just essentially an in route, he ran 16.2%. So about the same amount of times he was asked to run a go, and his success at that was a 47.7%. Like, that's not, hey, we're going to coach this and work on it, which you absolutely need to do with him. That is like, he is not comfortable doing these things on top of it, because coming out of that break, he's not seeing the ball quick enough, or he's not trusting his ability to catch that ball out of the break or whenever it's occurring. Like, there's a lot of alarming things to me where it's like, we're talking pick 27. I can't necessarily myself risk a lot of projection on that at pick 27. I think the Will Fuller, if you get Will Fuller to me, and that's a projection in itself, if you do get Will Fuller, that's great. But even then, you are trusting that he will be successful in go routes in an NFL offense, and find open availability where you are demanding a lot, which he should, but it's if he's comfortable doing it, things like that. And then I do think another thing you kind of tipped your hand at a little bit there with the scheming part, that's a valid thing to bring up. Like, maybe Tennessee wasn't scheming him open enough with some of these deeper posts and things like that whenever asked. It's like, you're probably going to have to do that for him. And it's like, I don't fall in love with the idea of, it's like, okay, we bring in a Jalen Hyatt, so now we even need Diggs to run certain routes to then kind of look at that to make sure it's working the right way and scheme Jalen Hyatt's availability downfield. That's where I kind of have a question mark with him at pick 27.
If you're watching on YouTube, please take the time to like, comment, and subscribe. It helps us out so much as we continue to try to be your one-stop shop here on Built in Buffalo for all your Bills talk. And we at Bills Chat obviously want to be front and center in all of that. We've talked about 2 of our favorites in Zay Flowers and Jalen Hyatt. Let's talk about the guy that I think is, if not consensus, the guy that is on most lists as being the best wide receiver in this class, Jackson Smith and Jigba. And interesting college career, right, Luka? Because in 2021, there were two receivers at Ohio State, Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, who were first round picks in the NFL. And both of those guys have gone on record and said that JSN, I'm going to just say JSN because I feel like I'm going to trip over his last name. JSN was actually the best of the bunch of that receiver. And then he got hurt in 2022 and he had the hamstring injury that really cost him the majority of his year. He is not a burner, but he runs what most people say is the most crisp routes in the draft. He lines up primarily in the slot. Where do you fall on JSN? I know Zay Flowers is your one. Is Junior two?
Yeah, JSN's my 2. He's the other guy in my tier 1 category. Realistically, JSN though to me is the one wide receiver in this draft and something we're going to talk about. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on because everything you said is valid. He's a very refined product. The only concern you really have with him is that a lot of what you're going off of was from 2021 just due to the unfortunate circumstances that was his 2022 season being cut short and not really being available. But overall, it's like the prospect and the idea of him is good enough that he's probably not falling out of the top 15. Like he is going to most likely be the number 1 wide receiver off the board for great reason. Like he was the one wide receiver to me that you don't even need to explain why you have him above Zay Flowers to me. And I just nod my head and go, I completely understand. Like it makes total sense in the world. Really, the only knock on him is he has an incredible route tree and all of these things. And yet it's all out of the slot. So it's like you look at him and you're like, can he be an outside receiver? That is a little bit more of an unknown. But as you even mentioned, the reason he was playing primarily slot was you had an Olave and a Garrett Wilson outside of him, that it's like those are your outside guys. So then he just fills an incredible hole there at OSU in 2021, being that slot guy and has incredible skill in that slot area. So he's kind of the most sure thing of the wide receiver draft class, in my opinion, and that's why he's there. But I don't really need to spend more time on it because, one, I don't necessarily see him as a guy that the Bills are going to go to trade inside the top 15 for, but that's where he's going to end up. So realistically, there's not a reason to spend too much more time on him.
So just a couple of things on him that really kind of point to why he is talked about so highly. He has elite hands and he is a reliable receiver. His quarterback had a rating of 141.1 when targeting JSN in 2021. We're using 21 because that's when he was last fully healthy. He sinks his hips well on routes. He's a quarterback's best friend, finds ways to get open, has the twitch to get open by winning on his route, but also understands zone and feel for that. As Luka mentioned, 83% of his reps came in the slot. So there is some concern how can he adjust to the outside, but life in the slot in the NFL doesn't have to be a bad thing. I think Luka, he comes into the league and at worst he's Jacoby Myers. So at worst, he's a very high end number 2 target on a good offense. And I don't really see a lot of bust potential here unless the hamstring injury, the soft tissue injury becomes something that lingers with him throughout his career. Let's talk about another guy that I think is in that early conversation, maybe back end of round 1, surprised if he goes into round 2, Jordan Addison. So Addison was my favorite receiver before I started deep diving into things. Let's talk about what makes him so special. 6 foot, 175. He is not what you would consider a high-end explosive athlete. And at 6 foot, 175, you would like to see more explosion to his game because he's not going to beat you with size. But what he does beat you with is he runs the best routes in the entire class. He works himself open with crisp routes. He has very good feel for defensive leverage. I think he has maybe the highest floor in this class, if not JSN, Jordan Addison does. But my concern on him, and the reason why I've kind of backed off on him, is one, I just worry about his small frame. And he's another guy that he was pressed 21.8% of the time, and he was in the 17th percentile of beating press. So unlike Jalen Hyatt, where it's 4% of the time and you're just like, he just wasn't pressed, there is a lot of body of work of Jordan Addison really struggling to beat press. He has good hands, but he does have some of those concentration drops mixed in, which again, for somebody that's not going to be the most explosive guy on the field or the biggest, you need when the ball is thrown to him to be caught. The last thing, Luka, and I hate to be like this because it makes it sound like I'm just looking at RAS scores and combine results to draft these receivers, but It's just really how I feel. He's such a polished route runner. And I don't know how much more polished he can get as a route. He looks like an NFL receiver running routes, but is he maxed out already? And that doesn't have to be a bad thing. I think Jordan Addison would come in year one and be a top 3 receiver on the Bills and be an impactful player. But I don't know if he's ever going to be a number 1 receiver in this league. And where somebody like Quentin Johnson, who we're going to talk about, in a little bit, Jalen Hyatt that I mentioned, I think the room to grow is exciting. Zay Flowers, like find a quarterback that can get him the ball and an offensive coordinator that can imagine up better ways to get him open. And that's really exciting. Where Jordan Addison, I don't want to say finished product because he's a young guy, but I feel I don't know how much better he can get because the things that I watch him and I want more from him on are size, speed, things that really aren't going to get better.
I think my mind with Jordan Addison, and he's who I start my tier 2 with. And that really, to paint a picture for you, is if he were to be taken just to start here at 27th, I wouldn't be necessarily over the moon about it. I wouldn't be awful about it. It would just kind of be whatever. And the reason I bring that up immediately is you need to be a vanilla ice cream person in order to love Jaden, everything about Jordan Addison. That's what you need to be, because everything you just described, everything that I feel about Jordan Addison is like that person that goes to the ice cream shop and just orders 3 scoops of vanilla ice cream. It's like, I get it. That's your thing. And it's a safe, reliable, delicious option. But there is no ceiling to vanilla ice cream. I'm sorry. Anything you need to do, you have to pay extra and get additives for in order to make it better. It's very plain otherwise. And that is what Jordan Addison is. He is a very, very good route runner, has a great extensive route tree. He has a lot of ability when it comes to his route running. Very crisp, very clean. Like you said, though, it's not like he's immaculate in his body control and hands are awesome. He can track everything in, things like that. It's all good to, pretty good, but nothing's like elite other than that route running, which is not necessarily like blows you out the water, but it's very, very NFL ready. So it's like with him, he just always leaves you wanting more, needing something else, things like that. It doesn't surprise me that you've come to this place with him. I've kind of always been there. And then the only reason I even was able to kind of put him in my tier 2 and put him at the top of this tier 2 class, Roy, appreciate that. It wasn't even up on the screen yet, but saw that pop up. The reason I brought him up there, though, is like, hey, if you draft a guy and you feel very confident that he's going to be your wide receiver 2 for years to come, that's great. And the tape he provided with a pro-ready quarterback of last year's draft being Kenny Pickett at Pitt was pretty dang impressive. And it was much more impressive to me than what the 2022 tape was while he was at USC, and everything that I kind of already came to the opinion of before I dove a little bit deeper with these wide receivers. Like, I was going based off of all the Pac-12 football I watch. I am an Arizona State guy, so unfortunately living in Buffalo is not a great time to be a Pac-12 guy, but you are up having late Saturday nights watching a bunch of that Pac-12 action. And like, Addison never wowed me. Addison was never someone that I was like, this guy's going to be a problem. And even against ASU's awful defense that it is every season, it's like, this guy's not going to kill us. Like, this guy's just going to be very good. He's going to probably move the chains and get them down the field versus this defense without breaking a sweat because of that route running and just extensive route tree. You never know what you're getting out of him, but it's not like he's going to break upfield. He's not going to do anything spectacular that's going to, kind of bring him over the top to me and make him an elite prospect in this year's draft. He's just, one more time, he's just vanilla ice cream, man. He's safe, reliable, and he is what he is. And you just need to be a fan of it.
If I came to you and I said, hey, Luka, I'm from the future 10 years from now, Jordan Addison is going to copy and paste have Emmanuel Sanders' career, would you take that with the 27th pick?
Ooh, I think that's pretty high standing. I'll be honest. I think Emmanuel Sanders had.
I just looked at his stats because I didn't want to insult Emmanuel Sanders, but he only had 3 seasons of over 1,000 yards. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't insulting him by making that comp because I think a lot of the way they play is similar.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'd probably take that, but I mean, you have to be sure of that. Like, you have to be sure. And of course, with drafting anyone in this draft, even the sure things at the top of the draft, there is a projection factor to it, and things need to work out in order to have. it's not easy having a 10-year National Football League career. Like, that is not something that everyone does. So I fully understand that, and I think everyone else fully understands that. So it's not a sure thing that that's what you're getting.
All right. We talked a lot about small, talked a lot about guys that maybe don't have the high end athletic traits. Matthew Mins, we are sharing a brain, my friend. Let's talk about the guy in this class that might have the most athletic traits of any of them. And that is Quentin Johnson. Vertical 40 or sorry 4.4840, and he has a 40.5-inch vertical. Now, if you're looking for an X, like this is that conversation we had before about looking for the perfect hotel room. If you're looking for an X, he is only one of the only high-end X wide receiver prospects in this class. He runs decent, not great routes, limited route tree for a bigger receiver. Very good body control. His start-stop speed or stop-start speed is very good. He actually, I mean, it's really impressive. Once he gets the ball in his hand in the open field, he can be very dangerous. I do question his feel for zone defense. I don't think that he necessarily runs the crispest routes, even though his route tree was fairly expansive. And I will also tell you that for a guy that's 6'3, 212, has all those physical attributes, when I watch Quentin Johnston, Luka, I feel like he plays small. He doesn't get off press very well. And those contested 50-50 balls, while we're going to be talking about guys like Josh Downs, and we already talked about Zay Flowers, who are much smaller, they go up and they attack that ball. And when that ball is in the air, they're going to do everything in their power to make sure that's their ball. Quentin Johnson is very underwhelming in contested catch situations. And for somebody who doesn't have, I would say, maxed out route running, is going to have to find creative ways to get open. He's probably going to be in contested catch situations. You'd like to see him better there with his size. Not a great blocker, but man, those traits, you can't ignore them. I think he finds his way into round one just because of those traits and because of some of the open field elusiveness he's shown. But I will tell you, Luka, if he's the name at pick 27, and in my mind, trying to channel my inner Brandon Beane, I think this is a guy that Beane will really like. I might be a little underwhelmed.
Underwhelmed's an interesting way to put it to me. I don't know if that's necessarily the route I would go, although I don't think we're far off from each other on Quentin Johnston. Yeah, Quentin Johnston is a two-page story or two-sided story. On one side, if you're obsessed with measurables, which I fall into the trap of a lot. I talked about DeJuan Jones a week ago, and he was a guy this past Monday on our podcast. If you haven't checked that out, that's where we talked about basically every other offensive player that wasn't a wide receiver that we liked at different positions, so on and so forth. Please check that out if you haven't, if you want to hear anything about those guys. But if you love measurables, if you love to look at a guy just for what he is physically and what he does at a calculable level, 6'3", 208 pounds, 33 5/8 inch arms, which is decent, 40.5 inch vertical, 134 inch broad jump, and ran a sub 4.540 time. That is borderline freak level stuff. And borderline, I feel like, is just me being tame about it. Like, there's a lot to love about his measurables. And then he has some highlights and game tape out there where it's like he is outrunning fast NFL ready DBs with that size, ball in his hand. And it's like, okay, there is definitely enough right then and there to me that, yes, I don't even think it's necessarily a question. It's not about him fighting into the first round. He is another guy that someone is absolutely going to fall in love with. He will be a first round guy. There is a place for him in those top 31 picks, not 32, because the Dolphins, of course, had to forfeit their first. But in the top 31 picks, he will be picked. Where it is, I think, is a little bit more of a toss up because of those other things. I think the funniest thing to me when I was diving deep into it, we keep bringing up reception perception. It's a great asset to use if you like analytics, you like understanding what receivers run, don't run, where they're successful, things like that. And it dives really deep into those kinds of metrics. The funniest thing is, and right before we went live, I showed you this because it was hysterical to me, is the only things he was asked to do were almost exactly what you saw DeAndre Hopkins do in a Cliff Kingsbury offense. You're either running a go, a dig route, which is an in, a curl, or a slant. That's it. That's all you're doing. And even with that small amount of ask, his in success rate, basically 2/3. Like, it wasn't outstanding. It's not like those 4 things he was outstanding. The go route, the 9 route. He wouldn't fight for balls all the time. And when you have that size and that physical advantage over a DB, you would expect him to fight for those balls and be able to come down with them more than he inevitably did. And it was just like, that's where maybe I understand your underwhelming comment. It's just like he is 2 sides to a story, and you ultimately need to determine, what do you think you're going to be able to do with him? Do you think you're going to be able to take that, measurable freak and be able to turn him into a legitimate X wide receiver, a legitimate dominant wide receiver at the next level here in the NFL? Or are these kind of concerns that you have seen already out of him going to linger throughout his career? Because those are legitimate things that are going to kind of limit what he is able to provide you, and ultimately will not be a overly dependable number one or even potentially number 2 guy, depending on who you have at number 1 there. Like in the Bills case, obviously he is not going to be above Diggs, but it's like, if you can't rely on him with that, even with all that freakishness, there are some concerns there where it's like, how comfortable are you at pick 27 to take this guy? And it's going to be, you either are going to absolutely love him, or you're just not going to see the value in spending your first round pick on him due to the concerns. Man, you just had to select. I was purposely not picking that one.
Oh,
He
I
does.
purposely picked it. So
I will comment on this one. It is an ASU guy that Walter brings up here. It is a guy that I am still in love with because I always back my ASU guys. But Johnston does kind of have N'Keal Harry vibes. I think the problem with N'Keal Harry is he went to absolutely the worst place as soon as he got to the pro level, and it killed all of his confidence, because what I see in the NFL is not even a shadow of what I saw at ASU with N'Keal Harry. Like, N'Keal Harry was as confident as could be. And I mean, he was returning punts and things like that at his size and everything like that with ease, and actually was able to juke and maneuver around individuals to make these big plays happen. I don't necessarily see all of that even with Quentin Johnston. That's where I kind of separate a little bit. And then, unfortunately for N'Keal Harry, to back my guy one more time, he went to New England and Bill Belichick basically killed him as a pro, and it just sucks.
I think we're being disrespectful to Quentin Johnston at this point. No offense to your guy, N'Keal Harry, but the athletic package of Quentin Johnston is much more expansive than N'Keal Harry. N'Keal Harry was a good prospect, but Quentin Johnston legitimately has DK Metcalf level upside if we can iron out the things we're talking about. He has that size, he has that speed, he has the run after catch ability. And I think he's actually probably a better intermediate route runner than DK was coming out of college. That was the knock on DK. So we'll see what happens. I will say one other thing, Luka. There's something that's kind of in the back of my mind with him. A lot of times when you see guys like Johnston, who are at every level of football, have always been the biggest, the strongest, and the fastest, and you hear like they don't go out, they don't win contested catch balls. I don't want to say he was bored in college, but there is the chance that he gets to the NFL and all of a sudden he's getting paid, and his interest in going up for those 50-50 balls and coming down for them against higher level competition just clicks in. There's also the chance that's just who he is. He's not an aggressive football player and it never clicks. But I think there's at least a chance that somebody who's always been able to win because he's bigger, stronger, faster just got a little lazy in his technique in college, and maybe being in the higher skill level competition of the NFL can force the improvement in some of those areas and make him a much better player because of it.
Um, that's one way to look at it. I get worried when it comes to hoping that elevating the level of play and elevating the expectations and bringing them into a pro environment, things like that, that's instantly going to reap rewards. I think there is enough evidence out there that it really is a true 50-50. And if you're a little bit complacent, lazy, I don't want to be harsh like that, but if you do kind of not hone in the little things of your craft and really make sure you execute in a certain way at the collegiate level, especially even while you're playing in, a top 4 team that makes it to the college football playoffs, like, if you don't need any more motivation than that, or you do need more motivation than that, I question if it's ever going to come. I mean, the right environment, the right coaching, whatever it may be, can always get the best out of certain individuals. That's what makes great coaches great. Like that is what it takes. You're able to get the best out of everything in front of you and your players that you have built as a roster. It's just, I don't subscribe fully to the belief that that can work for everyone if they already were that. It's a very 50-50 thing to me that I personally can't trust and lean on. It's like, I have to be in love with him, in my opinion, to want to take him in the first round. And there are going to be plenty of guys that are. It's just, you have to be in love with them and believe that that's the case. You have to be in that. You better be fully sold on that. And you are Sean McDermott, if you're the Bills, obviously for this example, Sean McDermott, all these guys fully believe they will be able to make sure they keep him focused and ready and be able to improve on everything that he needs to in order to hone in that craft that is his wide receiver skill set to make him a better player. Because if you let him get complacent, lazy, just kind of work to what he's best at and just let it be there, I think you could run into some issues where it just stunts everything about him and you only get what you already see. And that's to me not necessarily good enough for a first round pick.
So we are going to get into some of the later round prospects, second and beyond. We've talked about the 5 guys that I think you see mocked mostly in the first round. In review, Jalen Hyatt, Zay Flowers, Quentin Johnston, Jackson Smith and Jigba, and I am forgetting, Jordan Addison.
Yeah.
And okay, so Luka, and maybe there's somebody else that we haven't mentioned yet, but before we move on to the later round receivers, at pick 27, how many receivers are there on the board that you in the entire draft that you would love at 27? How many would you be okay with at 27? And then I guess we can just assume that after that you wouldn't be okay with it. So how love and then okay with.
Of these 6, you're saying basically.
Well, if there's somebody else that you think belongs in that conversation,
Oh,
that's fine.
no. Those 6 are the only guys I think are even remotely in some capacity in the conversation at 27. Like we already talked with JSN, he's not going to be there, like just
Yeah.
plain and simple.
But you would be thrilled.
If he's there at 27, Brandon Beane's writing that name down in a millisecond. Like we talked about in our podcast about another polarizing player. If he somehow magically fell at that pick, you're writing it as fast as possible. If JSN's there, you're writing it as fast as possible. That's not happening though. So I'm not even going to entertain that idea, although I'm very, very excited if he is there. Zay Flowers, I am very excited if he's there at 27. I also don't believe he will be. I think there's going to be a team inside the top 20, 25 area that will be in love with him, or a team that wants to trade back into that area to then get him and secure that kind of guy. He's the other one. Those are probably the 2 guys only that I am like in love with. Those are guys I would love at that pick. After that, I am okay with. I'm probably okay with Vanilla Ice Cream himself, Jordan Addison. I'm okay with, this is where I'm already like very close. I'm okay-ish with Quentin Johnston. And like Jalen Hyatt to me is like, I need a night's sleep and then I'll be okay with it. Like, let's put it that way. It's like,
no, you don't need a night's sleep. You just talk to me and I'll
on the
get you
live
there.
show. Yeah, you'll talk me through it. No. Regardless of anything anyone would say to me, I need a night's sleep. I need to think it over. And then all of a sudden just like dream about Deshaun Jackson highlights in my dreams. And then I'll be like, okay, I'm ready for a Jalen Hyatt guy on this offense. This will be fun as long as he can be crackhead speed like Deshaun Jackson. If he can magically find that out, that'd be awesome. Because
all the crackheads out there.
No, but it's a Patrick Peterson quote. If you don't know, Patrick Peterson references 2 individuals in the league at the time that had what he called "quote unquote" crackhead speed. It was Mike Wallace and Deshaun Jackson. Those were the 2 guys.
Okay.
That's what he said. So, anyways, that is where I was pulling that from. If you are confused, I apologize. It is a legitimate quote. Google it. Whatever. It was honestly funny at the time, back when Patrick Peterson was questionably, and in my mind, undoubtedly the best corner in the league. And someone asked him that question and he gave a legitimate answer. It was pretty funny. But that's it. Like that at the 27th overall pick, that is really it. And that's what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guys.
Okay. Thrilled for me would be JSN. I'd be thrilled with Hyatt, but I'll tell you, like I'm, as Jeremy White says on WGR, I'm on the wide receiver train. I want this team to address wide receiver. So even if it's a pick that I don't love, I'm going to love the fact that they address wide receivers. So I'm grading on a more lenient curve here. JSN, Flowers, Hyatt, I would love. Flowers, I had to talk myself into, but the help of my guy Luka, I'm good with it. Johnston, I think I would like. I don't even want to say Matt. I think I would like it. I get it. It's an aggressive move. It wouldn't be my favorite move, and it would bother me, Luka, if they took Johnston and there was a player like Flowers available to them. That would bother me. I would understand Johnston over Hyatt because both of them are projections, and you're just kind of choosing the flavor of projection you like. I get it. And then the last one, Addison, I'd be perfectly fine with it. I really would. He's going to improve this passing game. I think he has a lot of skills that fit into the NFL. And who's to say that, when you look at Stephon Diggs' RAS score, it was not very impressive. It was like 5.71. So I would be perfectly fine with that. Any of the top five, I'd be perfectly fine with. I think Johnston would be my least favorite idea, but they would all work for me. And I think it's very unlikely they're all off the board by the time the Bills pick. So they are going to have an opportunity to take a wide receiver. If the Bills go another direction in round one, Luka, who is your next favorite idea for the Bills or just in this class?
Oh, that's easy. So if you can't get Zay Flowers, my favorite guy, and all of these guys you pass up on, you decide to take DeJuan Jones or whoever at tackle, whatever tackle, whatever, well, linebacker, whatever you want to do at 27. And all of a sudden, it's because you are just in love with this guy I'm going to name right here, because he is basically, to me, 80 to 85% of Zay Flowers. That is the North Carolina prospect, Josh Downs. And I think that is like your argument you brought up with Zay Flowers. It's like you have a Zay Flowers. It's just like you're taking a more raw version of him now in the second round. And you probably have to be a little bit more aggressive for him in the second round. You're going to have to probably move up in order to get a Josh Downs, because he is yet another guy to me that has shown enough, has enough value, and there's a lot of things to love about him that, again, when the first round ends and a lot of GMs are looking at that board overall, he is going to be one that people circle because they like a lot about him. And they're probably either having to maneuver a couple picks or move up into that top 10 area in order to take a Josh Downs. That seems to be, a top 40 guy, we'll call it. That is what he is. But he's by far outside the first round. He's not going to be a first round guy. It'd be pretty surprising if he is, it'd be shocking, but he's kind of the next of the best, or the best of the next situation. Josh Downs, love a lot about him. It's everything I love about Zay. Just he's 80 to 85% of Zay Flowers.
I watched enough Josh Downs to say this confidently. He is a dog. I love this player. I don't know. I think he's probably going to fall to day two, 5'9", 177, 4.48, but he has the twitchiness of a prime Cole Beasley, but he has the speed on top of it. I think he's a player that if you get on day two, he is instantly your starting slot receiver, and he is going to be an ultimate pain in the ass with Diggs and Davis and Knox out there. And he's going to quickly become one of Josh Allen's best friends on this offense. And the idea of the two Joshes growing together and him having that long-term answer at slot receiver for the next 5, maybe 10 years really excites me. I love this player. I will say he was only pressed on 8% of his routes. He's 177 pounds, so things you would expect. He's not a great blocker. He's not great at tracking the deep ball, but that's not necessarily his game anyway. I mean, he's fast enough to get deep, but I don't think that would be his role in the NFL. I love that player. Anybody else that stands out to you on day two? I know there was a player you mentioned before the show. He was on my list, but I'll let you mention him.
Yeah, and real quick, just on Josh Downs, I mentioned Zay is kind of the Tyler Lockett to me of this draft. Rondale Moore is kind of where my head goes at more so with Josh Downs. That's exactly what he is. And remember how both you and I, we didn't even have this show yet. We didn't have a podcast or anything, but like we had Rondale Moore on our brains. We wanted him in this offense. He was going to be special. I think that is kind of where my head is at. And there's just a lot about him. And also his outside route running success rate and everything is surprisingly incredible, to be honest, for being a 5'9" guy. Very high success rate on a lot of outside routes. That to me is a sign of a very good receiver overall. And as you said, a dog. Okay. So into another wide receiver that I like a lot, a guy that you have Jalen Hyatt of course, very high on your list. Jalen Hyatt was the premier of the tier 3 to me. The guy right under him and the only other guy I have in my tier 3 list, making him a notable guy that I would circle on day 2 and be like, hey, this is a guy I love a lot, is Marvin Mims Jr. out of Oklahoma. he is like, it's so funny to me that the three guys, honestly, that I say me personally, I've fallen in love with the most are Zay Flowers, Josh Downs, and Marvin Mims Jr. These three guys honestly make the argument for a person like you, where it's like, why are you taking Zay Flowers in at pick 27? Because you can get Josh Downs, say, at pick 42, or Marvin Mims at pick 59. Like, they're all kind of a poor man's version of the person in front of them, right? To me, Marvin Mims is like, okay, now you're getting 70% of Zay Flowers, or 85 to 90% of Josh Downs. There's a lot about his game. It's a little bit more raw than the other two, things like that, but they're very similar. They can be dynamic. I mean, he ran a 4.38 and he's 5'11. So he even has a little bit, kind of more comparable speed to Zay Flowers while being a couple inches taller than both of them. Like, there's a lot about him when it comes to his athleticism that it's very exciting. I think the thing about Mims is there's not a whole lot of tape on him. There's obviously less of a success rate when it comes to zone coverage and stuff, similar to those other two guys, and things where you're very concerned about them. But like, to me, he has the size already at 5'11", and he's not like super slight. He's actually, the funniest thing about Mims is, you mentioned Jalen Hyatt. He is actually 10 pounds heavier than Jalen Hyatt. It's like, and he runs just as fast. And to me, it's just like, he has a little bit more girth to him because he's a little shorter. He's got a little bit more weight. There's a lot more substance to him, to me, where it's like, I think this guy could really be a threat. If he can kind of refine his route running a little bit, I think Marvin Mims Jr. is a kind of diamond in the rough potential guy there on day two that I like a lot about his game. And you just need to kind of refine a few, let's say 3-4 things to really make him even a guy where it's like, I'm not talking about slot with him. I'm talking about a number 2 speed weapon with a lot in his tool bag to kind of go out there and threaten, opposite of a Diggs or whoever your number 1 is.
There's a part of me that wonders if maybe draft Twitter just hasn't caught up with the NFL, because Marvin Mims, to me, should be on the same level as some of these guys we mentioned in the first round. I think he's a guy that should come off the board early on day 2. He has a lot of traits that we like. He has really good body control. You mentioned the fact that he was only pressed on 3.6% of his routes. That's not great, but that how can you really say that he can and can't beat press if he just never really had to do it? He had a 16.7 ADOT, so he's used to tracking the ball downfield, and he attacks the ball in the air, has very, very noticeable body control too. So a lot to like about Marvin Mims. Another guy that I wanted to mention here was A.T. Perry, because much like Quentin Johnston, another bigger X style receiver. Now, much more raw, 6'4", 198 pounds, 4.47 40. Unlike Johnston, A.T. Perry excelled in contested catch situations. He has very strong hands, and with the ball in his hands, he can make things happen as far as rack goes. He ran a variety of short routes too, slants, posts, outs, comebacks. But the issue with him is, even though he ran a 4.47, his giddy up is not there. He ran a very slow 10-yard split, so it takes him a while to accelerate to his max speed. So his 4.47 really doesn't truly play to that. He's not overly twitchy, so I think he's a guy that's going to have to win in those contested catch situations, and he does have some of those focus drops. But I see a guy like this, and look, I'm not saying he's going to be T. Higgins. Like, I don't think T. Higgins would be the best wide receiver in this class, I think. But his size, his ability to adjust to the ball in the air, and his hands, I think he can win in a lot of ways like T. Higgins wins in the NFL. And I think that has a place on the roster. And maybe, if you miss out on wide receiver in the first few rounds, he's a guy you could target in round 3 or 4 and get pretty excited about as an outside guy. Anybody else you'd like to mention, Luka?
Yeah, I think I would like to give a quick kind of, there's a lot of Tillman talk right now in the chat here, and I'll give a little bit of a on the mic conversation here for these guys. I think there is a lot with Cedric Tillman that is nice. I think everything like that. Cedric Tillman really is that kind of guy that is, hey, 6'3", he's 215. He's got the size and everything you want there. He's got 10-inch hands, which are fairly larger hands, things like that. There's things that you can like about him. I just think it's like, if you have that size, you just need to be more creative with the way you create separation at the NFL. And that's where the question marks become a little bit with him. it doesn't like it's not like he has incredibly fast footwork that then allows him to get out of cuts quick and things like that. Like there's a little bit of more of a project with him. And I don't mean project in any negative word, like he can't make an impact from day one. It's just a situation where I'm not going to draft him with the expectation of a legitimate role in an offense. He's going to be a kind of player in the offense, with the Bills or whoever he gets drafted by, where it comes in at a rotation. You're going to only be able to get probably 15 passing downs at best out of him. And he's going to have to kind of learn on the fly with those limited downs on how he can work NFL level corners to get that separation and get space in order to get his hands on the ball. Because even though you have the size, it's not like you want to make a contested catch all the time. You want to have the ability to make it simple on your life so you can turn up field and do other things, even if you don't have that elite speed. The other guy that I want to bring up, though, after talking about him is Jonathan Mingo out of Ole Miss. This is a guy that you probably are going to find in the third round. And depending on how wide receivers fall or, there's a rush on him, whatever it might be, he could even be that guy. I keep making this example, but he's a guy that, depending on how the draft works out, because he's not really a first or second round guy, if all of a sudden wide receivers fall and he's on the board come the start of day 3, he's then a circleable candidate. There's something like, oh man, somehow he slipped through the cracks. Now he's going to have to work. That's where I kind of come in he may slip to the 4th round, but he's 6'2" and 220 with 10-inch hands. And yet he ran a 4.4640 with a 39.5-inch vertical. You want to talk about measurables for a guy that you can find potentially in the late 3rd round, mid 3rd round, late 3rd round. That is something that I feel like if you just put that on a card and showed someone, hey, where do you think this guy's going to get drafted? They're probably going to say late 1st round, maybe even mid 1st round, if they slip somehow early 2nd round. The problem with Mingo, or I don't want to say problem, the knock on Mingo, and the thing is, it's really raw after those measurables. There's a lot to be desired when it comes to his route running and things like that. He does have a good contested ball, he attacks the ball up in the air. Like a lot of people think his early impact would be in the red zone, even with that kind of speed, because he can go up and get the ball and he wants to do such a thing. It's just the thing I love about him the most. And the reason that I'm like, hey, if you're sitting there and you need a weapon to add to this offense that, in the 3rd round, what's the best you can get? There's certain people out there that I like a lot what they do when it comes to comparables. And, they're basically comparing them and seeing if someone understands what they have here, they could turn him into this. He's very physical. He finishes runs, which is not something you see in a description of a wide receiver very often. And he loves to block, and he's a very good blocker who can dominate DBs. And with all of that in mind, people think that you could potentially get a Deebo Samuel-like impact out of this guy in an offense if the person knows what they have in him and how to utilize him and he buys in. Like I say Deebo Samuel, I am not telling you are drafting the next Deebo Samuel with this guy, because if it was a sure thing, he would be a 1st round guy. He would be a top 10 guy and everyone would be wanting him. There is a lot that you need to get with him and things like that and a lot to work with. But for someone with his size and speed and vertical and all of this kind of stuff sitting there potentially in the mid to late 3rd round, that is someone, Jonathan Mingo, that I circle and I go, I wouldn't mind seeing his name called as a Bill whatsoever at that point in time.
One thing that'll benefit Mingo and maybe even Tillman, who you just talked about in this class, is the Baskin Robbins thing. If you are somebody looking for size, they are 2 players that offer it in this class that doesn't have a ton of it. I like Mingo. I don't love him. I don't think he separated very well against some of the better corners he went against. He's also a little bit of a late bloomer, which can be a little concerning. But I do think I agree with you. I think there's enough there to like. And the Deebo thing is interesting because a lot of the concerns you have about Deebo Samuel about running routes and stuff, you just don't even care about on game day. Get the ball in his hands and see what happens. I did want to circle back quickly on the Tillman conversation, and maybe he's still also with Mingo. Tillman, I'm intrigued by him. He has a very strong release package versus press. Again, from the Tennessee offense, where they asked him to do basically one thing. He split out wide exclusively at Tennessee and had a very limited route tree. He did have a serious ankle injury in 2022, and that is a concern. I will also say when it comes to guys like Mingo and Tillman and the contested catch guys, I start thinking about Josh Allen. And what have we seen with Josh Allen? His motto to wide receivers is get open and catch the ball. Josh Allen, to this point in his career, has not really been I'm going to throw it up and let you make a play on the ball guy. Now, he'll do it at times. He'll do it for Diggs. He'll let Knox make plays. But I think if you want to be somebody that is involved in this offense consistently, that's not named Stephon Diggs, you're going to have to be open for Josh Allen. And some of these guys that are open when they're covered are great, but I think he's going to move on to the next read and find somebody that's open when they're open. And that's where I worry about some of these bigger, slower, throw it up and we'll make plays on it. I don't know if that's what the Bills are looking for. And when you look at some of the receivers they've added to the mix since Josh Allen came into his own, it's separators. It's Cole Beasley. It's Emmanuel Sanders. And then, it's Hardy this offseason, guys that just get open, separate. So I do question if some of these bigger guys. Now let's talk about a smaller guy, because I know he's popular among Bills Twitter and Bills fans. Tank Dell, Luka. What are your thoughts on him? He's a guy that I know the Bills had either a visit with at the combine or a top 30 visit. I am not a huge fan. I hate to be somebody that holds his size against him, but unless you're talking about a round four pick, I think there's got to be a better idea than the 5'8" wide receiver.
I'm trying to be respectful because I know a lot of people out there like him. And if anyone comes across this clip, and I don't want them to view that I despise this player. I think there's a reason you fall in love with any player you do. There's things you like and you just think that they're it. If you are not a fan of Zay Flowers, if you are not a fan of Josh Downs, or you're not in love with these guys, if you're not in love with Mims, but yet you're in love with this guy, I am very confused where your mind is at, because I think I just gave you 3 examples of someone that can provide extremely similar things to a Tank Dell, and then also have other things that Tank Dell doesn't provide you. And it's like, okay, so why are you taking Tank Dell? You're such a, come on, man. Why are you in love with Tank Dell when you don't find yourself in love with these other guys? And if you are in love with all these other guys and then you also love him, that's cool. But there's nothing on his tape to me that goes, this guy is an NFL ready wide receiver. And I don't mean it in the sense of I want him to already be a polished route runner stuff. It's just, he seems like a college wide receiver to me. He seems like an extremely good athlete, an elite athlete that is just exploiting what it is in college at the level of which he found himself playing. That is what it is. It's kind of like an extreme, and I have been on record saying how much I love the individual that I'm about to drop here. I'm doing a lot of comps tonight for someone that doesn't like the comp game, but he is like, to me, a really, really poor man's fascination version of Tavon Austin. Like, there is something about him that people are polarized towards and love. And he's got some highlights and doesn't have a highlight tape that even sniffs the one that Tavon Austin had, but has highlights that gets people absolutely to fall in love with him. But when you look at that and you look at the success or lack thereof of Tavon Austin at the next level, there's a reason for it, because ultimately he just didn't provide enough of the tool bag. There wasn't enough in his kind of wallet there to actually work at the NFL level. And you're just taking a raw, good, elite athlete that doesn't have a great route running ability and doesn't track the ball really well deep and doesn't, have great hands to bring it in and contest anything. It's like, now you're really limited in what you're doing, and you have to be extra creative in how you use them on offense and how you're getting them the ball, where you're kind of going out of your way to do so. And you can probably find way better ways to use that role in your offense with other individuals that can do more of the other things you need them to do. It's just, that's where I'm at with Tank Dell. It's like, I don't necessarily hate the player himself. I just don't see the advantage of taking him over other guys that will be there as well around the time you would have to take him. And it's just, yeah, I don't necessarily get it myself.
The Bills need somebody that can be a focal point of their offense or can be an every down player in their offense. And Tank Dell screams to me to be that guy that can get 10, 15 snaps a game. You drop special packages for. And I feel like the Bills already have those guys with players like Nyheim Hines and Hardy. And they need more foundation players, and they need somebody to be in the pipeline to be ready to take over when either Diggs ages out or Gabe Davis leaves as an undrafted or as an unrestricted free agent. And to me, Tank Dell does not really check either of those boxes. One other guy I wanted to mention that I know has gotten some traction among Bills fans, Michael Wilson. And I'll just tell you, I guess I don't get it. He's had 2 seasons that were cut short by injury, 2022, 2020. He's not an explosive player. He has shorter arms. I don't understand. I guess I'm probably missing something, which is always possible, but I hear him talked about in the maybe like early day 2. And man, I can't get on board with that. Am I missing something, Luka? I don't see a special player. There's injury concerns. He doesn't have what I would consider like prototype size. The speed isn't overwhelming by any means. What am I missing with this guy?
You're not missing anything. I think Michael Wilson is yet another guy where it's like you see some of his measurables, you see potential there at flashes and moments, but it's like you're ignoring all of the negatives, or like he doesn't have any twitch to his game to create any sort of separation. And it's like, okay, now you're putting yourself at a disadvantage at that size with the lack of open field speed. And I'm with you 100%. He was yet another guy that I never went into watching a game of watching all the Pac-12 football that I unfortunately watch, where I was like, this guy is going to be something I really, really want to pay attention to if he was even available. That sounded horrible. As soon as I said it, I was like, dang, that was brutal. But if he was even available, if he was even on the playing field, I wasn't overly threatened by him. And it wasn't like I even thought of like how I thought about Addison, right? Where I'm like, this guy's going to be a reliable route runner and just be able to move the chains for the offense when they need him. And he's going to be kind of that kind of safety blanket guy for the USC offense. Michael Wilson with Stanford was not even that. It was kind of hit or miss. You just really, it depended on how he felt on the day. If he was 100% healthy and he just had a good matchup across from him, he was able to make some things happen and stuff like that. I don't necessarily see anything about him based on where you have to pick him. And I think you brought that up, and that's a very, very vital point of all this. Like for me, we're talking about you have a scenario here where you're either taking a Michael Wilson at pick 40 or a Josh Downs at pick 40. I mean, the answer better be Josh Downs. Like that is not even remotely a question to me. That there is one guy that I see potential that could have even seen him thrown into the back end of the first round. And now you have another guy that I feel like teams are reaching because of a couple of things they might fall in love with a guy. Like that is where I'm at with this. And to me, Michael Wilson, to talk in fantasy drafts, you always have a few of those guys that are untouchables to me based on where they would fall in the draft and what they kind of are offering you. Michael Wilson's an untouchable to me just because of where you have to pick him. I don't see the upside of it based on that pick evaluation. Uh-oh. Did I lose Josh? Oh, you there? Sorry about this, everybody.
I'm still here. Okay. I think the internet, I heard it slowing down there. So maybe that's a cue. I was going to talk about Jaden Reed a little bit, but maybe we should get out of here, Luka, before my internet decides to say, hey, no mas. But Luka and I will not be gone for long because on Monday morning, we will be dropping our defensive prospects profile. We'll be talking about every position on the defensive side of the ball. It'll be on Monday afternoon. It'll be on YouTube. Monday morning, it'll be there on Spotify, Apple, wherever you can find your podcast. We have a super chat to get to. How about a big tight end like Darnell Washington would reinforce the line, but also involve a 2 tight end system, or scheme, something like that? James, great question. So, and Luke, if you start losing me, just mute me and you can fill in, because we did talk about some of this on our audio podcast as far as Darnell Washington. But I'll just tell you, in my opinion, the guy's speed rare. I think he's into the league as instantaneously one of the best blocking tight ends in the sport. I worry about his explosion as a pass catcher. All of his pass targets in college really came within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. I'm not sure if he'll ever be much more than a Mercedes Lewis type player who's like a 6th offensive lineman, and maybe you get what you get in the passing game, but the tools are there. Could be a really fun ball of clay to mold. He's not my favorite idea for the Bills because, one, I don't think second tight end is a big enough need to take him at pick 27. And if you want Darnell Washington, you better take him at pick 27 because he won't be there for you in the end of the second round. He could certainly upgrade their run heavy package they use right now with Bobby Hart at tight end too. Give you an added dimension of a guy that can get down the field and be one-on-one with a linebacker. But in general, I don't love the player. There's other options at tight end that I would Bills go that route. But Luka, since he was kind enough to hit us with a super chat, why don't you also speak on Darnell Washington?
Yeah, I appreciate the super chat first and foremost. Like you mentioned, we talked about him a little bit more on our audio pod, but real quick, it's like Darnell Washington is a interesting situation because it's a ton of potential and a ton of kind of projection with him. And you look at him in his size and his tangibles and stuff like that, the metrics that you can't get in, kind of coaching. And it's off the charts. He's a massive human being with good body. I don't want to say good body control, decent enough body control for the size of human that he is. And he actually does have a little bit of speed to him, even at that size as well. You just fall into the trap. And I mentioned this on our audio podcast this past Monday. If you want to listen to it and hear about us talk about more prospects, please do, James. We go at length at pretty much every other offensive position. I just, you see him. I mean, there's even the comp I'm going to make here, man, a lot of comps. The comp I'm going to make here, they went to the same school, similar size metrics, and he was drafted based on projection the projection of what he could be. Leonard Pope out of Georgia as well, back who was drafted by the Cardinals. It's like they wanted him to be that red zone target. And early on, because people just didn't have tape on him and didn't understand what he was about, he was getting touchdowns. And then after that point, it was like he fell off the face of the earth. He had 9 catch. I think it was the stat was like he had 5 touchdowns in the first season with the Cardinals. And then he had 9 career catches with the Cardinals following that season. Like it was something remarkable like that. And it was just because, unfortunately, as big as he is, he's not a perfect receiver. And then defenses, because he's not perfect at that, you can scheme around him or just have your checks on him to make sure he's very uncomfortable and not able to do anything that he can do because of his size. So appreciate the super chat once again. But yeah, it's like Darnell Washington's interesting. You got to really love the guy to take him at where he's going to be. And he is a fascinating enough prospect that I understand the love with him, but it's you got to love him. You got to love him to take where you're going to have to take him at.
And the second part of the question is, could Dorsey scheme a 2 tight end offense? I think Dorsey's a big question mark right now. There were a lot of offensive weapons that the Bills handed him last year. James Cook in the passing game that we didn't see utilized much at all. Naheem Hines at the trade deadline that never found a role on offense. So if the Bills were to go out and spend a premium asset on a second tight end, that would definitely put a bullseye on Dorsey. If you better make this work, because a guy like Washington or Myers or Kincaid coming into this offense would need to be involved and would need to have a significant role, particularly with where the Bills would be hoping to draft them. We do have a comment here on Campbell. We're gonna be talking about defense coming up on Monday. I will just tell you, we do appreciate you chatting with us tonight. Neither Luka nor I would be super excited about that Campbell pick at 27. I understand completely where your head's at. We have a hole at linebacker. Don't necessarily love the prospect, and don't necessarily love this linebacker class in general as far as picking at pick 27. If the Bills want to do that, I would hope that they would do so by trading down and fill the hole that way. But I love the idea. I think it's a popular idea. It is gaining momentum right now. You are certainly not alone in that thought process. Luka, any final thoughts before we get out of here tonight?
No, I think we can make it short and sweet and everything like that. It was a lot of ice cream talk and a lot of comps on this episode here, but with your internet starting to pick up here or there, having a little bit of spikes things, I think we can keep it nice and short and sweet here and get on our way here and let everyone else enjoy their wonderful Friday night and the weekend to follow.
Yeah, I hope all of you out there have a great Easter weekend. Hopefully my internet can get this figured out before our draft show coming up, because we are going to be on for 3.5 hours. And I just cannot be dealing with Luka hearing every third word I say, particularly if the Bills take Jalen Hyatt in the first round, or if they take Bijan Robinson, because I am going to be out of control with my excitement. But we will see what happens with the draft. Luka and I will be back on Monday morning with our defensive prospects episode. And beginning this week, you can catch our full audio versions of the podcast on YouTube. We'll be releasing them later in the day on Monday afternoon, so you can look for that. James, we did reference the offensive prospects that is available on YouTube too in full. If you don't want to just listen to the audio version, you can see mine and Luka's smiling faces talking all about it. But we are in full draft mode. Luka and I love this. Every time you see us from now until draft day, we will have a draft specific topic. And pretty soon we have a mock draft coming up that we're very excited about. But we will see you next time on Bills Chat Live, and we will see you this coming Monday on Bills Chat Podcast.